All right, y'all. I believe we are back up. It is 9:13 p.m. on Tuesday, August the 20th, and you are watching the Creative Scholar podcast. Welcome. I am your host, Dr. Dannetta, and I'm so excited that you decided to join me for a few minutes right here where we meet at the intersection of theology, psychology, and creativity. I hope you're having an amazing Tuesday evening, and my desire is to not be before you long tonight. Thank you for those of you who joined on time tonight. I'm so sorry that I had to scoot off and then scoot back on. Little audio issue. Number one, I did not have my microphone plugged in, and I deleted that live from my stream on YouTube, but now I wish I had left it up so I could go back and see what it sounded like without the microphone on your end. But I did not. Nevertheless, thank you so much for joining me again this week. And we are going to spend a good bit of our time tonight on two of the areas that are dear to us here at the TCS Pod. And those two areas are going to be theology and psychology. And so you're looking, if you're watching on YouTube during the time where this is streaming live, you see the two main topics that I have there. This says episode 5. Why does it? I messed it up. I'll go back and change the what I have there. It should say episode 6. At any rate, it should also have the title there. You should also be able to see the title there. But we're going to be talking briefly tonight about something that I've mentioned on the pod before, maybe last week, a few weeks prior, a couple of times, but for whatever reason, this week it has been over the past really 48 hours as I have been narrowing down what I want to cover tonight. This is something that continues to ring in my heart and in my mind. And so I'm going to talk about a couple topics that prompted me or nudged me even more towards this topic, even up to this evening before I got on live. And then we'll go from there. So if I'm not mistaken, what I typed in there for the title, it says echo chamber. And I mentioned this the other week when I was talking about social media as one of the means of working on sleep hygiene. Last week we talked about sleep hygiene, and we talked about how social media is one of those things that distracts or takes away from sleep hygiene. Either social media late at night or social media early in the morning, or even just social media any time of day too much can bother the nervous system, which in turn impacts sleep. And so we got on the topic of, for me personally, how sometimes I start to experience social media. I start to experience social media as an echo chamber simply because it is designed to be just that. When we click on or we scroll through a particular topic, and we linger on it long enough, it tells the algorithm that we like this, and so we get more of it. And then we oftentimes will end up getting not only more and more feed from a particular content creator that we enjoy, we will get more things like it. And the algorithm continues to feed and feed and feed on those things. Well, eventually, as most of you know who are avid social media consumers, it begins to feel much like an echo chamber. And I'm looking for my water. I had it right beside me and now I don't see it. And I'm getting a little parched already. And so just as I was thinking through that topic and how it is one of importance to kind of linger on, I was looking at some different things throughout the past week or so that have been happening, in the news or on social media. One of the things we talked about last week was all of the different conversation around election season. But interestingly, one of the clips that a lot of people in my community being a black Christian creative that is very well churched, over my lifespan, a lot of people who would identify as a part of my community, one of the clips that has been floating around a lot has been of Kirk Franklin. I believe he was being interviewed by Cam Newton, and he made the statement about the church basically weaponizing marriage against single people. And I watched the clip that a lot of people were talking about. I did not watch the interview in its entirety. And one of the things about the way we consume podcasts, a lot of times we don't even see the full podcast and we see clips. So whatever meaning is drawn from that clip, that's what everyone is commentating on. And so from the clip that Kirk Franklin was talking to Cam Newton about marriage and singleness, and he was saying, he gave some very legitimate examples of some of the things that single people in the church experience. However, him saying that, people took that phrase and did a whole lot of things with it that he may or may not have intended. And I thought it was really interesting to hear how another podcast duo, it was Kevin on Stage and Angel, in Here's the Thing is the name of their podcast. And Angel's take on what Kirk Franklin was saying was that she disagreed that the weaponization of marriage against women can't be blamed on the church. She felt like basically the institution of marriage, this is what, I'm not quoting her, but what I understood of what she said was that the institution of marriage was created, by white America, and it was made to be advantageous for white males. And what she was saying, I'm sure there's a whole lot of truth to it when it comes to the foundations of some of the things that this country, unfortunately, were founded upon, and some of the things that were perpetuated over the years through colonization, through slavery, and then after slavery was over, just through, the law being used to keep people of color down, black people, and then for others who came to our country, what is now all of our country, the law being used as a weapon against them as well. And, basically her point was, it wasn't the church that started the weaponization of marriage. She went further back, and I thought about what there's another phrase that another popular podcaster uses that I very much agree with a lot of time, although I don't actually agree with a lot of this particular podcaster's stances on a lot of things. I love that they often say you can't start in the middle. You need to, you got to take it all the way to the beginning. And what I feel like is Kirk Franklin made one statement, then Kevin on Stage were examining his statement, and they were able to kind of walk it back to where a further historic reference of how marriage is used against, or was the institution of it, was founded against women. But what I thought about when I listened to her speak was how even that is in the middle, how we need to walk it even further back, especially people who profess Christianity, to talk about where marriage, as God designed it, shows up, where it shows up in the Bible, and what was God, the God of the Bible's true intention for marriage. And, although people can't be responsible for covering everything in their podcast, oftentimes they're just giving their opinion on a particular take. And then, like I said, with Kirk Franklin, we saw that clip of the podcast on his take, and he said some very true and very valid things, as did Angel. But I thought about how dangerous the echo chamber of social media can be to the heart, the mind, and the soul of a person who is a believer. And I'll even take it as far as to say for Christian creatives, for believers who are in the entertainment industry, believers who are doing public things that whereby, basically, their salary is crowdfunding in a way. When you work full time for yourself, and you have to generate funds based upon what you produce and people consuming what you produce. In a sense, your salary is crowdfunding. And while a lot of people who are believers have managed to be authentic and not and unashamed of what they believe, I believe it can very easily become a slippery slope, as we have seen many times. And one of the ways I believe it becomes a slippery slope is because of the echo chamber of how we consume media these days. And I gave that example of the Kirk Franklin conversation and then the Angel and Kevin on Stage conversation, because there are so many people who, and again, they can't be 100% responsible for everybody's theology. They can only be responsible for theirs to a degree. But at the same time, to whom much is given, much is required. When you're given a particular platform, you do have to be careful. And you have to have some ownership over how the things you say and do impact your audience. But I wanted to make that point. This segment of what I'm really getting ready to go into is not about bashing or blaming any of those particular creatives, Christian entertainers, Christian artists, Christian creatives. This is not about them really at all. That's just an example of how much social media is an echo chamber. And when I say echo chamber, I mean, everything is distorted. You're hearing all of these different voices coming from all over the place with different angles and sharing different opinions about things. And even though these are people that are giving a Christian perspective, or giving their perspective as a Christian person who is in that space, oftentimes they do not walk it back to what is the original design in the Bible. They do not always take it all the way to, well, this is what we're seeing. This is what we see happening in the church. This is what we saw happening during colonial times. But this is actually God's design for marriage, and it's beautiful. This is actually what we should aspire towards. This is actually how we need to move back into God's original design. This is what I do. This is, or even sharing. Well, and for example, with Kev on Stage and Angel, Kev did give the example of how, he had to grow up and kind of be renewed in some ways based on the way he thought about his wife and some of his expectations. So, he shared in that particular instance his experience even with the way marriage has been weaponized against women. And again, it's a clip. So with a clip, unless I didn't go and watch the entire episode to know, maybe they did walk it all the way back to what the Bible says about it. But in many times past, I have seen that not be the case. For most podcasts that I see, where unless it is one that is biblically based, and that's really the focus. So it really can be a slippery slope. And you have to ask yourself almost, as a person in that space, how much can I really do from here? I can't teach everyone the Bible every time I get ready to talk on my show or on my podcast if that's not the purpose. I know, for example, on Kev on Stage and Angel's podcast, they talk about what's happening in the world. They talk about what's happening in culture, but at the same time, I guess because for so long, especially at the inception of where we all met Kev on Stage, and at some point when we met Angel, we identified them highly and closely as believers. One of the reasons why so many people that profess Christianity are such large supporters, why a huge portion of their audience are people who are believers, who are so happy to see someone doing good, clean entertainment. So it's kind of and again, I'm not casting any judgment, but I am putting forth the thought of how much responsibility can come with identifying overtly as a believer in Christ and then doing and saying things in a public space. I am not at all bashing them and saying that I do handle now or will in the future everything perfectly. Um, Even over time, there have been some things that I felt completely fine about in the past that at this juncture, I feel like, that might be a little irresponsible. But that may be my personal position and my personal call, and my personal, I guess, sense of purpose around the reason why I get online to do anything at this point. So when it comes to how dangerous social media can be and how much of an echo chamber it can be, even more now than what I expressed last week, I feel like it's so important to create boundaries around social media for creatives. And it is a huge thing because most of us use social media to do our work. Most of us use I'm using social media right now to broadcast this podcast. But even the more, we are not living in times where it is okay for people who name the name of Christ to rely solely on podcasts and different clips of people online for our spiritual nourishment. And it's kind of hard to work in a space where, for the most part, all you do is produce media. And, well, I'm not saying all you do, like, belittling it, but I'm saying, like, that is your whole life. It is a very full amount of time that one spends creating things to be consumed by the media. So since we're people who create, and at this point I'm talking to creative entrepreneurs who profess Christ, of all that we create in order to stay in the know of what's happening in the world and even have things to talk about, we consume media. But I think now more than ever is a good time for those of us who are newer in the space and for those who have been in the space for a long time and have an audience out the wazoo, to be mindful that we do use our platforms to bring truth and real definition to things if we can. And like I said, I only saw the clip of Angel and Kev on Stage. I only saw the clip of Kirk Franklin. But because of what happens in social media, people say a clip and it turns into a whole lot of other things. And I would love to see creators who have great influence that profess Christ and that are doing the things that they're doing by the grace of God, bring clarity and bring and highlight certain things that will share more of the truth of what God says about these things that we are talking about. That's basically what I'm saying. because I believe that we are living in a time where, in order to stay focused in purpose, and in order not to drift, and in order not to slide down the slippery slope, we have to be intentional and very, very careful. I don't believe we need to be hyper vigilant, but I almost would like for us to be closer to hyper vigilant than we are lax and relying on um, just or putting responsibility and saying like people got to know God for themselves, and I'm not, this is not a Bible podcast or any of those things. I feel like even in comedy, even in beauty influencing, all of these different genres, we can bring glory to God in all of these genres without being super churchy or without being hyper vigilant and afraid of everything and everybody. I feel like we can be mindful is basically what I'm saying. All right, and I hope that what I'm saying is well received and understood. And I am happy to expound even more on this topic. Coming again, even next week, I may talk about it a little again. But for tonight, I want to quickly go to Ephesians 5. And I'm going to read this passage in several different versions. Right now, I'm reading from the Christian Standard Bible, Ephesians 5. And this is telling me that my disc is getting full. At any rate, I would still hope that it will continue to record live. Right? So Ephesians 5, and we're going to start at verse 15. And it says, "Pay careful attention then to how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. So don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." All right, that was in the Christian Standard Bible. Now I'm going to read it to you guys in one more version, because this is really the main point of what I'm saying about that echo chamber. We are responsible of being clear, first and foremost in our own walk with God, but when it comes to the things of God, we want to make sure that we are clear in how we influence. All right, now I'm reading it in the ESV. This is Ephesians 5, verses 15 through 17. It says, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil." Verse 17, "Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." And it goes on to give examples of what foolish living looks like, as well as what it looks like to live life in the Spirit. Ephesians 5 is a great passage. Interestingly, also in Ephesians 5, which I had no intentions of reading through, if you scroll on down to verse 22, it talks about the institution of marriage. It doesn't say the institution of marriage, but it talks about wives and husbands. In verse 22, it says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." Verse 25 says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish." It goes on to say in verse 28, "In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body." Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. The mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ in the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Right? So, my point tonight, you know, just further emphasizing what I spoke on last week about how social media can really be an echo chamber, and how that is one of the reasons why it is that is probably the main thing about it that annoys me the most, is that it really can be, it can start sometimes with a topic that is worthwhile, and it can literally be a topic that dwindles down to like nothing but sound bites. And oftentimes the depth and the richness of the topic that could actually benefit someone's life and family is skipped over. Whatever is controversial, or whatever is whatever is going to be catchy, or whatever is going to appease people's flesh, or appease the nature of loving anything that is gossip, is what ends up standing out. And so what ends up happening is people who are not necessarily standing firm in their faith and don't really understand what the scripture actually says about marriage will take those things and be like, yeah, that's why I don't go to church. Yeah, that's why I'm not into the Bible. And yeah, that's why, this, that, and the third. And, to each his own, and people have to get to their own place where they will seek God for who he truly is. I don't know. There's just something about, I just believe the times that we're living in, there's something that just almost comes across disingenuous when I start to hear a lot of people who are very overtly known as believers, when I start to hear most of their dialogue being critiques of the church, and less of it being let me model, let me be an example of what it means to be the church of Christ. I don't know. That's just me. And again, I don't see everything that everyone says and everyone posts, but that's why I feel like we need to be kind of careful. Sometimes the stuff that we say, yes, be honest, tell the truth, but make sure you tell the whole truth, because at least at that point we can refer people back and say, oh, no, you took that clip of me saying this, but this is what I actually said about God's church. This is what I actually said about his bride. This is what I actually said about marriage. Like, let's make sure we cover all of it. If we're going to say things, let's make sure we cover all of it, and not just say what we feel is going to go over well, that is going to impress people who are not impressed with God and don't necessarily are not necessarily looking to know how to live his way. And again, that doesn't mean any of us is perfect, or any of us does everything just precisely the way God would say for us to do it. But I believe if we have knowledge, we're responsible. And if we know to do good and we don't do it, to us it is sin. And I know that we don't all know the same things, but sometimes it's just the basic things that are like fundamentals of Christianity that I feel like sometimes we allow people to speak on in a negative way, instead of giving them our side, which is actually what we know about God through his word. Yes, I do feel like people's experiences should be validated, that they have experienced. I am a single woman in the church. I am a single black woman in the church. So, and I have been in church all of my life through the different seasons of my life. So I very much can attest to a lot of the things in that particular conversation, which again is just my example, So I express those things, and well, not I've experienced the things that he said in some ways, but so naively that for a long time I didn't even realize that that's what I was experiencing. Um, to Kirk Franklin's point, I remember a pastor telling me he was such a kind individual and such an encouraging individual that I had to look back and realize this is what he meant. A particular pastor, he never discouraged me from going to seminary. He never discouraged me from whatever he believed that, I was following God's leading and that, God had a plan for my life in that regard. But when I look back, one of the comments that he made to me now was that I understand what he was saying. He was telling me that he it bothered him basically to see women go and get trained and have callings and then not be able to use their gifts in the church. And that was in short what he said. I paraphrase what he said, but I I just appreciated him supporting me and feeling like I was someone who had been called by God. I just appreciated that. I didn't even absorb what he was saying. I had no I had no inkling in my mind that it would ever be a thing. I guess because I never had pastoral aspirations per se. I always felt like I would work in the counseling and the teaching space in some degree, along with music because that's what I had always done in church. But it didn't dawn on me for years that, oh, this is really a thing when it comes to women in the church. So, saying all of that to say it's very real to me by experience some of the things that Kirk Franklin was saying. But at the same time, there's a whole other side where I've experienced very healthy churches who had no problem at all with me serving in the church. And there may have been certain roles that were not welcome. I was not welcome to, but in my experience, I didn't necessarily want any of those roles anyway. But I understand, or I understood for women who have been called in particular roles that they couldn't have in church. So I get it. I agree that there have been times where being single has been weaponized. But I guess as a single woman, I do believe that they're not being single, but basically not being married has been weaponized. But at the same time, I feel like in a lot of ways, well, I'll leave that at that. I feel like in a lot of ways, we all have different experiences, and I appreciate people actually addressing things that women go through in church. But at the same time, my experience does not trump when it comes to God's design for marriage and why most people will be married. Majority, not everybody, most people will be, especially if they're people who want to be, even if the ages are different, that they experience that. And that, it is not for you to sit around and rot until you're married. And just knowing that there are people who are married who feel like they're sitting around and rotting because they're not able to, or they did not learn to walk in purpose prior to being married. So, I appreciate things being addressed and people being honest about the things that we experience in the church, but at the same time, let's make sure we bring it all the way back around. I think maybe that's my concern, especially as a believer talking to a person who's not a believer. But that's a whole nother conversation. I won't take that too far. I won't go too long on that, but I've already gone too long on it. But my main point for tonight with the echo chamber conversation is, let's see, let me click OK. My main point with the echo chamber conversation is that this is a time where we really need to be careful with what we consume. It's always been a time where we need to be careful with what we consume. But it is very crucial in this hour. And speaking specifically to creative entrepreneurs who create content as well. One of the next parts of my title, you guys see, it says oversubscribed or unsubscribed. So, oversubscribed is a concept, and it's there's actually a book that we're reading in a group that I'm in, or that we were reading, that I'm still reading, but the group was reading as a whole, about what it means to be oversubscribed, which basically the concept means that as a service or product provider, that you have so well connected with your audience or your consumer, the people who want and need what you have, that you have more customers than you can serve, basically. In short, that's what it means to be oversubscribed. And my admonishment for creative entrepreneurs is to figure out, and we talked about unfollowing last week, but this week I want to talk about unsubscribing for creative entrepreneurs. I believe that we need to know how to unsubscribe to certain sources, unsubscribe from certain sources, so that we as individuals with individual purposes and audiences and consumers and clientele that God has for each of us, we need to know how to and when to unsubscribe from certain sources so that we can focus enough in a particular area so that we can become oversubscribed, meaning that we have so tapped into the community that we need to serve. We have so tapped in with our time, with our efforts, with our focus, with how we create, with how we manage our time, that we are trying to find ways to make sure that we can serve the people that need what we have. Knowing again that there are billions of people just on social media alone, and I stated this last week, no one of us could serve all of them. No one of us will meet the needs of all of them. No one of us has the capacity to meet the needs of all of those people who are online looking for something. And the way that each of us can tap into that, I believe, is one, unsubscribing from certain ways of thinking, certain ways of being. If you scroll down to maybe about 2 years ago, when I would get on every week on Sundays and do Dear Creative, on one of those particular Dear Creatives, I talked about the limiting belief of thinking there's only one way to do something. That's one of the main limiting beliefs that a lot of creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I found that in my studies. I found that in my research. I found that in my reading. I found that in my own life. Oftentimes, being creatives, we pride ourselves on being innovative, figuring out how to do whatever it is that we want to do, even if it's never been done before. But sometimes the time factor or even the quantity factor will throw us off. Either we feel like something is not happening in the timing that we thought it should happen in, or even sometimes it's not even like it's not happening fast enough. Sometimes we learn something that we can use now, but we feel like, oh, I should have done that when I was 20. But here I am learning this and such at 40. I probably shouldn't even move on that. But that is a limiting way of thinking, because you have to utilize things in the time that you're able to utilize them. And sometimes you didn't know what you know until you know it. And then in some regards, there are some things that didn't even exist in the way that they exist now 20 years ago. So it's like, it's a waste of time and a waste of purpose And it stifles your hope to think that, oh man, I wish I had done this at 20. Well, you didn't know to do it at 20. You know to do it now at 28. You know to do it now at 35. You know to do it now at 45. And now is the opportune time. You have been blessed with the resource. You've been blessed with the knowledge. You've been blessed with the ability. Now is the opportune time. So unsubscribing from beliefs and ways of thinking and doing things that are limiting, such as being caught up on your timing and not God's timing, as well as caught up on particular ways of doing things, or thinking that you have to do things a particular way to please a certain group of people that may not even be the demographic of people that you are designed to serve. And that, even takes me back to what I was saying earlier about, no creator can be responsible for everybody's theology. No Christian creator can be responsible for everybody's theology. So, while I have my opinions about certain things, there's a certain way that I'm going to see and speak about a topic that maybe some of the people who I could have critique for may not. And that is why they are them and I am me. That is why I am me and you are you. And so my encouragement tonight for creatives is to unsubscribe from things that are going to hamper the way you think, for one, about God, that are going to hamper the way you think about and see yourself, and that are going to hamper the way you go forth in the things that God has called you to. Another way to hear the word unsubscribe in this conversation is literally that. I recently went through, and I have so much more to do. I feel like I need probably an entire, maybe a whole Saturday, like from morning until evening, to go through all of my emails and just unsubscribe from all of these different subscriptions. Because I'm the type of person that when I'm learning something and I subscribe to someone's newsletter or their monthly email or whatever, when I subscribe to things, I just, I will read, I will keep up, I will learn, and then I usually can discern when it's time for me to take what I learned and move on, basically. I mentioned this last week when it comes to even social media. I tend to be a very loyal person. I tend to be a person who follows people out of loyalty sometimes. And then even when it comes to subscriptions of creators that I highly support and I believe what they have is very good, sometimes I will continue to get their emails and it's just filling up my inbox because I don't read it anymore. And I had to remind myself that in this day and time, a lot of the different memberships and different things like that, they are supposed to be a revolving door. They're supposed to be something that they're, in a way, if you think of it like school and semesters, they're supposed to be where you come and you learn for a certain number of semesters and then you graduate, you take it and you move on. And what I had to think about was the fact that even in college, when you graduate, you didn't learn every single topic and every single major that is offered at that college. But the 2 or 3 topics you became fluent and efficient in is why you get your piece of paper. And even though you might sing the praises of that college and that university for the rest of your life, as I do, some of the colleges that I attended and universities that I attended, it wasn't designed for me to stay there. It was designed for me to learn what I could in that time and then for me to move on. So I encourage you today to go through your subscriptions in your email, go through your follow list on your social media, go through the paper mail, the snail mail that's filling up your inbox, and decide what you need to unsubscribe from. Decide what you need to just have a new relationship with. It doesn't mean that you can't resubscribe later. It doesn't mean that you may not have a use for something at another time. But basically, in a sense, I'm saying declutter. In order to get to a place where you are oversubscribed because you are so efficient at what it is that you offer, and your time management is what it needs to be. In order to get there, decluttering is necessary. So just like we declutter in our lives, in our spaces, in our physical spaces, sometimes we need to go through and declutter our digital spaces. And that's something that I have learned or am learning, and it's something that I go through maybe every couple of years. Sometimes it's like maybe every 2 years. I feel like it's kind of like a every year and a half, 2 year thing for me. I'll go through and just purge. I mean, I don't purge as much as I should, because if y'all could see the number on the little mail app on my phone, astronomical. Literally out of this world. How many emails are sitting in my inbox that have not been opened and will never be opened? They need to be purged from my box. So that's my encouragement for creative entrepreneurs today. Unsubscribe. Get rid of some of the digital weight so that you can focus on producing what it is that God has given you to produce, so that you can focus on care of your own soul in a way that will enhance what it is that you put out there into the world. And more than anything, going back to what I read in Ephesians, it is a time for us to not live recklessly. It is a time for us to live with intentionality, understanding what God's will is for our lives. And I've been saying this over and over again. I said it last week and I say it again. This is a time to truly know and love God. If you are a Christian, period, not just a Christian creative entrepreneur, that just happens to be I guess one of the one of the main audiences that I speak to intentionally. But what I'm saying is for everyone that names the name of Christ in this day and time. It is the time to know and love God. And if that means less of consumption of whatever, even if that means fasting, in the sense that actual biblical fasting, whatever, the overconsumption of anything that is not drawing us closer to God. It's just time. It's just time. It's always been time, but many of us sense it now for different reasons. We're all in different spaces in our lives, but now is the time. Now is the time to not get lost in the echo chamber. There are so many opinions, so many thoughts, so many experiences that people are having. But there is something about having your own experience with God that no one can take away from you. There is something about reading through the Word of God and having God's Spirit illuminate things and give you an understanding of who God is through the Word for yourself. There's something that nobody can take away from you when you have that experience. And, there are so many of you who may watch this that have been walking with God for years upon years upon years, and you know God for yourself. But even it can become so hard to focus and hear God's voice, with all of the noise that's of just the busyness of life. And so my encouragement tonight is, whatever needs to be cut away from our schedules, whatever it is, even if it is that person who calls you like clockwork every night to gossip, if that is taken away from the time that you can quiet yourself and spend it with God, it might be time to unsubscribe from that daily phone call of gossip. Not saying to, not continue to foster and have good relationships, but make sure you are advocating for your time with God. So whatever that means, I encourage you tonight to declutter your digital space, declutter your physical space. I'm certainly working on that. And then also declutter your mind. So anything that is taking away from being able to have a peaceful and a clear mind that you have control over. You know, some things we don't have control over, and we learn and we depend on God to have peace in the midst of a storm. But some things are self-inflicted. And so if there are things that are self-inflicted by way of habits, let's work on those things tonight. Let us unsubscribe so we can be oversubscribed in the area that we have been called to in God's purpose for our lives. All right, and so last but not least, this is gonna come off very random, but this has come to my mind several times in the past couple of weeks, and then more recently, you know, there was a particular conversation that I was privy to. I won't say how because I don't want to give it away, but it was for public consumption. And what I recognized in the conversation was like, whoa, like this person is diabolical. I almost want to say at the art of gaslighting, but I don't want to call gaslighting an art. At the abuse tactic of gaslighting. And the person wasn't necessarily, it wasn't an abuse situation. But I think what hit me so heavy was that, like, this is gaslighting at its finest. And what hit me was, if this person is this good at gaslighting for this particular purpose, let's just say it was for a sales purpose, I would hate to be a person in a conversation being taken advantage of by this particular person. I would probably recognize it because I don't know. I probably would. Maybe not right away, but I'm one of those in retrospect people, and they don't be long in retrospect. Sometimes sometimes it's when I walk away. I will allow myself to process like, oh my gosh, like no, that didn't. But anyway, anyhow, I was privy to a particular conversation, and when I realized how heavily this person used gaslighting, even though it was for a quote unquote good cause, it was scary to me. It was really scary to me because what I realized is that sometimes people do things that are literally emotionally abusive and they don't realize it. Now some people know exactly what they're doing, and they have a bad motive, and they are just abusive people. But some people, I believe, have so normalized using particular tactics to get a result that they don't realize that it's emotional abuse. And so I wanted to just really quickly go over some of the different examples of emotional abuse that I think are really relevant to speak on. And I actually, let's see. I had a list of them on my phone, but what I just realized is that I had also written out another list. Let's see. Oh man, it looks like I'm frozen. Of course I'm frozen now that I'm talking about something that the enemy uses as a huge tactic against us. But I'm going to keep talking. Maybe my screen will unfreeze. Maybe it won't. Or how about this? Maybe I'll just switch. I just switched cameras. That's what we're going to do. And for the end of this, I just switched cameras because my other one, I don't think it died. I don't know. Anyway, it froze. So I want to go over these really quick with you guys before I get off. I just wanted to define really quickly emotional abuse because And maybe if I turn this light off, this blue light off, this will look a little better. Well, I won't worry about it. I wanted to find this because emotional abuse can be very sneaky and very subtle, and sometimes people can be using these particular tactics or doing these things that are very common things, but they do a lot of damage to a person. And for example, gaslighting. So we know that a simple definition for gaslighting is making someone question their reality. Now, but there are some situations whereby we want a person to question their reality because they are not really in touch with what their life really has become or with what they're really doing, right? So a person could say, I intentionally gaslit this person because I wanted them to look at things from another perspective. But to that, I would say there's another way, because when you get someone to questioning whether they did something or said something intentionally, it's abuse. It's literally abuse. And then if you add a power dynamic to it, it is very damaging. And whether it is being perpetrated from a man to a woman, from a woman to a man, from a man to a man, or from a woman to a man, gaslighting is emotional abuse. So I don't care who you are or what you use it to achieve, gaslighting is emotional abuse. Figure out another way to get your result. And I have to say that because I know that there are people who literally feel like they are doing something good. Or sometimes people are, they have a good end in mind. Or sometimes but just remember that is also sometimes the excuse of people who literally are abusers. They believe that their will is best. And so whatever they have to do to get you to carry out their will, they're willing to do. So I say to you, even if you are a person with good intentions, you're doing something good, you have a plan, gaslighting is not the way. And here are a few other things that are emotional abuse. And like I said, you can be someone who does these things all the time, or someone who does it occasionally. If you find yourself doing these things, remember that it is emotional abuse. Name calling is emotional abuse. Making excessive demands, blaming, constant blaming, threatening punishment, isolating a child or an adult intentionally from others, being cold or unsupportive to someone intentionally as a punishment, openly admitting dislike, especially if it's for a child. Now, an adult saying you don't like them, it is what it is. If you really a full-grown adult walking around saying you don't like so-and-so, right. If you need to do that as an adult, have at it. But when it comes to a child, if you work with children or even just children in your family saying, I don't like this child, or telling a child you don't like them, it's emotionally abusive. Being harshly critical is emotional abuse. Shaming is emotional abuse. Corrupting or encouraging inappropriate things to a child or an adult, you're being emotionally abusive. You're not physically forcing someone to do something, but you know when you're doing and saying things to influence someone in a negative way, in a way that is going to be to their detriment. And here's one, and I'm going to give this one last because I think it is one of the most prominently used amongst our community. And it is the silent treatment. I don't know if anyone ever let you know, but I need you to know that giving the silent treatment is emotional abuse. Giving a silent treatment to someone as a means of punishing them, it is emotionally abusive. That is not the same as letting someone know, I need a minute, I can't talk about that right now, or I don't prefer to talk about that right now. That's not what I mean. And for those of you who do give people the silent treatment, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I love that this has come to my mind to talk about now, because no one's giving me the silent treatment right now. So I'm not projecting, but I have experienced it before. But the type of silent treatment that I have seen people or heard of people experiencing is diabolical. And for those people who give it, you know that you're doing it. You know what you're doing. And for some people, that is their fight or flight response. But find it, conjure it up. Find it within find some girth. Dig all the way deep down in your soul and pull out I can't talk about this right now. I will talk to you later. Don't use the silent treatment against people as a weapon. It is emotional abuse. And anytime I hear someone talking about it, because I know, like, couples will say that, they do that to each other. And some people say it's not that big a deal. But what I want you to know is it is. It is a big deal. And, I'm not slamming anyone who's done it, because most people don't even realize it's emotional abuse. People believe that is their right. I don't have to talk to you if I don't want to. But it's literally pretending that someone does not exist. And I think because I'm not going to go there, but it is one of the cruelest things you can do to someone. And most people who do that know it. That's why they do it. If you're someone who uses the silent treatment to punish people when they disagree with you, or to punish someone because they don't do or say what you like, or because they disagree with you, or y'all got into an argument, find something else to do. Even if you just have to make it clear that we will talk about this in a few hours. I can't talk about this right now, or I need to leave, or I'm going to go into the next room. Conjure up those few words, but don't use the silent treatment to punish. It is emotionally and psychologically abusive. Stop it. Those are my few words tonight. Like I said, this has come up a couple of times. I wanted to cover emotional abuse, but I think what reminded me that I wanted to cover some of these very common things that people do that classify as emotional abuse is when I saw the scenario where the gaslighting was like out of this world. Like, and the person was so good at it that, like, even though I was listening on, I had to back up and retrace myself. And it wasn't even me in the scenario, and be like, wait, did that say or did that do? But when I realized how good they were at gaslighting, it was scary to me. Because I was like, even though you're doing this for a good reason, oh my God, if you actually do this to people, you didn't just wake up good at gaslighting. So if you're really good at gaslighting, even if you're using it for a good cause, it can kind of be an indication. I don't want to say that everybody who's good at gaslighting is an abuser, but it is an indication that there's a little toxicity that needs to be worked on, because it's not good. It's not good to be good at gaslighting people, because it is one of the most damaging psychological abuse tactics. All right, and that's all I have tonight. In short, my message for my creative scholar family is Let's be intentional to unsubscribe from the things that we need to um, just push to the side or do away with in a season where we need to be focused in purpose, focus on God, focus on what He lets us know is important, but also so that we can be oversubscribed by way of purpose, oversubscribed in our businesses, oversubscribed in just the love and peace and joy that we find in God and in the Word of God. Remember Ephesians 5 says, "Be careful how you live. Let's not live as fools, but let's live as those who are wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil." Let us have a firm grasp on what the will of the Lord is, because it is not His will that we are ignorant about what it is that He would have us to do, think, and say. And being caught in the echo chamber of the media can truly be a place where confusion abounds, where sound bites are just exalted very highly, and where we lose sight of what the actual truth is, where we lose sight of how things should be. So be encouraged this week coming up. I knew I didn't want tonight to be longer than an hour, and we're at an hour and 6 minutes, but I'm thankful for the time that we have spent. It seems like I encountered new challenges with this software. Is really good that I use, but just different things with my different tools that I need to work on. But every new thing has allowed me to try something new right here on live. So I'm excited. I love to learn new things, and excuse me, even though I don't enjoy having to switch cameras and my video quality diminishing at the last portion of the podcast, I did kind of get a little kick out of switching cameras. Because now maybe I do it more on purpose. I think what I need to do is let me see. Let me see. Let me see what happened. Okay. I figured, the lighting would look a little bit better if I turn my sign off. But at any rate, thank you so much for joining me here tonight for the Creative Scholar Podcast. I hope you have heard, learned, or been reminded of something that will be helpful to you in your everyday life. I'm glad you're here. Here we still rolling. This is episode 6. And join me again next week for episode 7. And remember that doing your inner work, all these things we're talking about, all of the things that sometimes we want to keep stepping across that we don't want to tackle. Let's remember that doing all of this good stuff, all of this hard work, talking about the hard things, being a good soldier, learning and growing. Let's remember that doing our inner work is not just a good idea. It's not just a nice podcast topic. It's the right thing to do. See you next time. Bye.